Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining our diagnostic training session today. And what you're about to see is a pre-recorded training session we did over in the United States. But be assured that a lot of the material that we cover is really applicable to any automotive application. So just be aware that yes, it is a lot of North American vehicles, but they will apply a lot of the same principles apply over in the UK as well. Now, if you do have any questions, if you're watching this during the premiere, you can just leave it in the chat. We'll be monitoring live chat. If you're watching this after the premiere, then just feel free to leave a comment underneath the video and we'll get to those as we can as well. So my name is Jason Gabrenas. I'm one of Snap-on's diagnostic technical trainers. I've been in the training department since 2013, traveling around North America, helping techs and shop owners get the most out of their diagnostic equipment. Before I did that, it was a couple years as a diagnostic sales rep at Snap-on, so I had 30 different franchisees I worked with, as well as the shops that they serviced in order to help everyone get the most out of their diagnostic needs. Then before I did that, it was 8 years at Subaru, so I worked in a dealership, and over time, I guess, just became the default diag guy in the shops. I always ended up having the drivability problems, the intermittent problems, the weird wiring problems that would show up on those cars. And that's really where I cut my diagnostic teeth, was trying to figure out all those weird head scratcher type cars that would come into my day. Then before that, bunch of other miscellaneous wrenching jobs. Been a little over 25 years under hood experience for me. We're talking about data bus testing and diagnosis, right? Because this can be it can open up a whole new world of diagnostic possibilities if you just know where to look and how to test. Because communication issues with a vehicle, or even some other random codes on a vehicle, sometimes can be caused by network issues, right? So we're going to cover these are all of the different communication networks that we'll be covering. This is actually a two-part course. So we're watching part one tonight. Next week at the same time, we'll cover part two. So we're talking about our low-speed networks, so J1850 and K-line, LIN Bus, CAN, FlexRay, MOST, and Ethernet, which is diagnostics over IP is what we're going to talk about. So for this part of the course, we're going to focus on our low-speed networks, our LIN Bus, and our CAN. So first off, a little overview on networking, right? So a network is a system that uses information through all available resources. So anything that's connected to the network, they can all communicate with each other. Now, you may already be familiar with types of networks, even if you're not familiar with automotive networks. Things like LAN, which they call a local area network. So those are computers in the same location, right? So they're basically, if you think about maybe your shop or your house, things that are hooked up to the same router, right? Those would be considered a LAN, so a local area network. And then we have a WAN, which is a wide area network. So that's multiple LANs connected to each other. So that's really just a fancy way of describing the internet, right? A bunch of smaller networks hooked up over a larger network. And then, of course, the types of networks we'll talk about in the automotive industry. We have those single wire networks we talked about too, and those have been since mid-90s at least, pretty widespread. But we have CAN, which stands for Controller Area Network. And then we have LIN, which stands for Local Interconnect Network. And then we have DOIP, which is Diagnostics over IP, or in other words, internet communications on some of these newer vehicles that are out there. When we're thinking about a network, and we need to kind of understand how a network works or what the computer is looking for signal-wise in order for it to communicate. And what we're looking for is a voltage differential between the high side and the low side, because sometimes we'll have a constant high signal that will be driven to ground. Sometimes we have a constant ground signal that's driven high. Just depends on the design of the system. And then we want to think about the different voltage differences, or the voltage difference between the high and the low side. That's where our data lives in the top, between the top and the bottom. So we look here, this is just an example on a LIN bus. Now we see the high side in this case is going to be battery voltage. All right, so whatever the battery voltage happened to be, so in this case, 13.35 volts. And then it pulls down to ground, or close to ground, or towards ground, should I say. In this case, we're reading almost a volt, so 0.91 volts. The differential between that is going to be 12.44 volts. So we're within, maybe half a volt or so on either side of 12. So we want to see right around that 12 volts. And really the main thing we want to see is does it have this full up and down? Do we have nice square tops, square bottoms? Do we have any noise? Do we have anything missing? Do we have anything going on there? So that's what we really want to focus on, is the voltage differential
between the different circuits. As we're testing, you want to use a scope to test this because you want to be able to see the pictures of the patterns. You really can't, meters do not react fast enough when it comes to testing networks. So we really need some form of a scope in order to test this. Now, if we think about the easiest way to connect to a vehicle and the most common way to connect and test a network would be at the DLC. All right, and there are some standardized pins that we can look at when it comes to diagnosing at the DLC. So pin 1, most often used for low-speed CAN communication terminal. So GM, I know, likes to use they have a single wire CAN low speed that they use on pin 1. Pin 2 will be for your J1850 variable pulse width, which is what VPW is, or J1850 pulse width modulated positive side, because that pulse width modulated has 2 sides. We'll talk more about that as we go further into the presentation. Pin 4 and 5 are always ground. So pin will be a scan tool power ground, and then pin 5 will be a common ground. So if you ever need to find a ground and you're close to the DLC, you can use pin 4 or 5 for a ground. Pin 6 and 14, so that'll be this one and this one, will be for your high-speed CAN. So high-speed CAN high will be the positive side, will be on pin 6, and then CAN low will be on pin 14. Then we get over to pin 7. That is our keyword communications terminal, or you may have been heard of it referred to as the K line. All right, so many vehicles use this for their scan tool communication, K line there. There's optionally, with the K line, there's optionally paired an L line, and the L line is mainly used to wake up the module. You'll be able to send a signal down there that tells the module to wake up and start communicating. And then we get down here to pin 10, that's J1850 pulse width modulated negative side. So there's a positive side and a negative side depending on how it's set up. And then pin 16 is always power. So as long as the fuse is working, you should have a constant power on pin 16, and you should have constant ground on pins 4 and 5. Those are your always on any car. That's how it's set up. Some vehicles may only use 1 or 2 other pins. Some vehicles, like I know some GMs, they'll use a CAN bus on these 2, a CAN bus on these 2, a CAN bus on 3 and 11 as well. 3 and 11, 12, 13, 14, and 6 are all CAN buses. There's 3 different CAN networks on some of these newer vehicles, depending on how many modules they have. So you just really need to know where to test. So that's our data link connector. And then how do we get to the data link connector? You don't really want a front probe, because that could cause a communications problem right there, because you could widen the connector. It's usually pretty hard to back probe there too. So we have this OBD2 breakout box that's available. And what that does is it plugs into the DLC on this cord here. This cord has another DLC connector on the end. Then there's another DLC connector right here at the top of the box where you would connect your scan tool. And then you can hook up in any of these 16 individual banana jacks for whatever channel you happen to be testing with your scope. So that's a good way to get it into the tool without damaging anything. And you can still communicate with the vehicle while you're doing that too, because oftentimes you want to have some sort of a data communication back and forth to have activity on the line. So just because the line's dead, if you're not communicating with the car, doesn't mean there's something wrong. You always want to be communicating, or trying to communicate with the vehicle anyways, when you're trying to test these networks, to make sure you have activity there. So let's start with our low speed networks. We're just going to go through each of them kind of at a higher level. And then when we go through and go live on the tool, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about testing. We'll touch on testing as we go through here as well. But first off, we have J1850. J1850 has been used for many, many years. It's a single wire protocol if it's a J1850 VPW, which is variable pulse width. So it pulses variable lengths of time, but you will see a pulse. 10.417 kilobits per second if you care what the data transmission speed is, but that is the slowest of the bunch that we're going to talk about. GM was a big fan of this back in mid-late 90s in the early 2000s. The J1850 bus was pretty much their communication standard. There's also a J1850 pulse width modulated version of J1850. So what that does, it modulates the pulse width on versus off instead. So that consists of a 2-wire bus with a transmission rate of considerably faster, 41.6 kilobits per second. Ford was a big fan of this. So mid 90s up and through the early to mid 2000s, you would see J1850 pulse width modulated on many Fords, right? So that uses the J1850 variable pulse width uses a 7-volt differential, and then the J1850 pulse width modulator use a 5-volt differential if we're looking at the signal on the screen there. So here's an example of a J1850. We see around about 7 volts there, a little bit north of 6. All right, so that is that's a square wave, right? And then we just have the pattern there. So that's one bunch of data that's being sent out. And then for the pulse width modulated version, you can see this is a 2-channel, right? Because we had a positive and a negative side we were talking about. So the yellow side is positive, the green side is negative. And you can see how they mirror each other. So when the yellow side goes up, the green side goes down. When the yellow side goes down, the green side goes up. And they're mirrored on either side. And you see how it's kind of an every other piece look to it. So one goes, so let's see on this low one, the high side goes to 4.5, the low side goes to half. So that's about a 4.5 differential. And then we have on this one, we have a high side of 0.2 and a low side of 5.04. So that's about a 4.5 differential there as well. So it sends up and down. It's about 5 volts you want to see in that field in between the high and the low. And then there's also K-line, right? So many vehicles that didn't use the J1850 bus when they have a single wire bus would be the K-line bus. Now that's once again a single wire, transmission rate of 10.65 kilobits per second. It's relatively slow. And it also uses a 10 or 12 volt differential, depends on how it's set up. So actually I captured this one off a Subaru. And so this is a 10 volt differential. You see we have 10 volts on the top and it pulls it right down the ground on the bottom. So that is a 10 volt range between there and there. And that was on pin 7, by the way. And Subaru still uses this, or still used that up until about 2014 or so on their scan tools. So if you're ever worried about the refresh rate on a Subaru scan tool, that's why, because they use this slower data bit rate until they finally went full CAN. Only a few years ago, actually. So that's K-line. So many other vehicles use that, mainly Asian vehicles use that. I'm sure there are still some domestics that use that as well. Then we have LIN Bus. LIN Bus is newer, right? It's still a single wire network, but it's a totally different design and strategy behind LIN Bus. So LIN Bus stands for Local Interconnect Network, and it was specially developed to achieve cost-effective communication for intelligent sensors and actuators in motor vehicles. So it is a master and slave situation. So it's really going to be in places where you think I have a switch and I have maybe a motor, or a switch and an actuator. Oftentimes maybe windows, right? So I want to roll my window down, so my window switch sends a signal to the motor and it rolls the window down instead of it grounding a relay and all that. So it really cuts down on a lot of wiring. It's used where we don't need to actually drive the car down the road. We're not using it on things that are, throttle and things of that nature, where we have to have that speed. It's more on the driver controls. So it is a single wire, once again, transmission rate up to 20 kilobits per second. Doesn't really need that data throughput in order to move our actuators and motors. And it uses a 12 volt differentials from high to low. So we saw that really early at the beginning of the presentation. We'll see it again here in a second. Some examples where you might find that on a vehicle, things like roof, right? Sensors, light controls, sunroof controls, steering wheel. Pretty much any of the buttons on your steering wheel nowadays are going to be running through a LIN bus. Wipers. So if you were with me last week and we talked about that harness between the body control module and the rear wiper that wasn't working, well, that was a LIN bus signal on a 2016 Tahoe that we talked about. It's a LIN wire that goes in between the module and the motor in the back. Seats, seat motors, engine, sensors, small motors like grill shutters as well. Grill shutters run off that LIN bus. Climate controls, all my HVAC motors, my blend door actuators, things of that nature. Mirrors, mirror switches, window lift controls, once again, LIN bus. So here's that shot of the LIN bus signal again. So once again, that is a 12 volt differential. In this case, we had about 13.35 volts coming through, alternator voltage, line voltage. And then it comes down to around about 12 volts lower than that. Right, so it definitely didn't hit all the way to ground, and it's really not supposed to. It's supposed to be that 12 volt difference. Now, if it was 12 volts at the top, we'd see 0 at the bottom. Right, but not that common on a car to have exactly 12 volts, right? So those are our single wire networks. Now we'll talk starting into our 2-wire networks, which will continue through into next week as well. But right now we'll talk about CAN, because basically, if we know CAN, we can learn how to test the other 2 wire networks that are out there as well. So high-speed CAN consists of 2 twisted wires with a transmission rate of between 100 to 500 kilobits per second. It's usually about the standard. When you're down in the, say, the 100 kilobit range, maybe you'd be talking about a mid-speed CAN or a medium-speed CAN. 500 kilobits would be a higher speed CAN. If we get any faster than that, you're going into other technologies such as, say, FlexRay. CAN uses a 2 or 2.5 volt differential, depends on how it's set up, and we'll talk more about how the signal works in a few minutes. One signal circuit is identified as CAN high, and the other one is CAN low. So we have a high side and a low side, and they both transmit, and they're really transmitting in a loop over these 2 wires. So let's think of CAN high as my transmit side, and my CAN low as my receive side. So we'll see in the data packets, if you were here at the very beginning, we showed that video, but if you see the data packets, the high and the low, they should match because it should be the same data actually traveling and making a loop there. At each end of the data bus, at the end of the wires, remember how I said it was a twisted pair? And the twisted pair is important too because that helps reduce noise, RF noise. So you want to make sure if you're working on CAN and for some reason things get disconnected or moved around, you want to make sure they stay twisted. You don't want to untwist them and then just leave them that way because that helps with the noise reduction. But across those 2 is a 120 ohm resistor between the 2 sides of the circuit. And oftentimes that resistor more than likely is going to be in a controller. I've also seen where there's maybe accessory ports on the network on some cars, and they'll just have a little resistor that plugs into the end of the line. It's just an open line that you could plug a module into. All right, so at the end of the line, there's always that 120 ohms, and that's like a stop sign. Right, it tells the data, okay, we're done here. This is the end of the line. So here's just an example of CAN, right? Super simple layout. So we have CAN high on this side, CAN low on that side, 120 ohm resistor between the 2. Nice thing about CAN is it's modular. Like I said, we have situations where you could have open lines where you can just plug another module in, right? Oops, I should be, how random is that? So I can just add modules. And when I add modules, they'll start communicating with each other. All right, we want to add more modules? Sure, let's add more modules. Plug in a few more modules. They'll just add their data to the data stream, right? The thing about CAN is it's what we call a mesh network topology. So they're meshed together. Everything kind of talks at once. So if my PCM and my ABS controller and my transmission controller all needed input from wheel speed sensor, all right, so then it would send the wheel speed sensor to all of the different modules. In the older style designs, like the single wire designs, I would have to have a single wire to each of my modules that I would need to connect to in order for them to connect that way. Right. There's also, with CAN, we can remove modules and maybe there's just one. And if there's only one module, we can still have that CAN communication. You can still communicate with the single module, whatever that happens to be. And then here's a example of a known good CAN bus pattern. All right, so we see our different data packets, these squares here. It's, if you think about it, it's very similar to our single wire squares. We had up and down, and we have up and down, right? And we'll get to this in a little more detail when we go live on the tool too. But you have a high side, and then you have a low side, and then you have an idle in the middle. These are the different data packets, the bits and bytes going back and forth. And you test that on pin 6 and 14 on any standardized car. We also need to address gateway modules, right? So we have multiple types of networks on vehicles nowadays, right? So we have high speed, we have low speed, we have mid speed, we have chassis buses and object detection system buses and all these different buses on a vehicle. So in order to translate between those different networks, the different speeds, we need to use a gateway module of some sort. Now, if you think about a gateway module, just think of it kind of like the router in your shop. It's the router for your vehicle. Signals come in, it routes them where they need to go. So let's say I have an example, a vehicle that has no communication with the ECM. I go in and I want to scan it for codes, and I go into the engine and I get no communication. So what's the problem? Do I have a problem with the ECM, or do I have a problem somewhere else in the car? Well, good strategy in that case would be, let's see if we can communicate with anything at all on the car. Maybe do that one-touch full vehicle code scan, that pre-scan that checks all the modules in order to see, do I have communication with anything? And let's say in this case, I did have communication with some of the things on the car, but I didn't have communication with other things on the car. Where would I start? And whose fault could it be? Here's a wiring diagram on an example vehicle, kind of like what we're talking about. So this is a case study that we did. And the tech could not communicate with anything on the high-speed side. So ECM, TCM, transmission itself, electronic brake control module, power steering control module, etc. Couldn't communicate with the BCM either. And then the low-speed stuff, though, it could communicate. So it could communicate with things like the radio and the SRS module, the radio. Yeah, I said radio, HVAC. Those types of things which were on the low-speed bus. So if we look at this wiring diagram, another thing you might get really good at if you're testing networks is reading a wiring diagram, because it's worth a load of help when it comes to looking at the wiring diagram. So we look at this left-hand side here. This is our diagnostic connector. Pin 1 on this vehicle is a low-speed bus, and then we have pin 6 and 14, which is our CAN bus. You'll notice pin 14 goes into the body control module, pin 6 goes to the body control module, and pin 1 all go to the body control module. So our body control module is our gateway for this vehicle. So it needs to transmit the signals out. So pretty much anything on that high side of the car, it was not communicating at all. And that's these two lines right here heading off. So it must have been some sort of internal failure, because we could still communicate with everything on the low speed side, which are the green wires. All right, so we replaced the body control module, it solved the problem. Many vehicles have gateway modules on them now. They may be specifically called gateway modules. I know, like on a Mercedes, it's called a SAM, which is a signal acquisition module. On some BMWs, I think the footwell module takes care of some of that responsibility as well. And then we have just plain old gateway modules, or in this case with this GM, it's the body control module is the gateway module, right? And oftentimes, if they don't have a specific gateway module, I've found in my experience anyways, that it's the body control module takes care of that. Let's talk about bus problems. We talk about what known good looks like and what are we supposed to see on the network. What happens if we have a problem? What does that look like? Well, luckily we happened to find one that was broken one day. We took some pictures. So this is on a J1850 bus, or a low-speed bus, single wire. So we wanted to see a 7-volt top, right? 7-volt differential, right about at 7 volts right there. And then we should see ground on the other side. And well, we made it to ground over here. Didn't make it to ground there. It didn't make it to ground there. And notice how it doesn't look like a square. It looks like a curve, almost like maybe a piece of pie or something like that, right? So we have a little curve there. If you are supposed to be seeing a square wave on anything, and you see this, some sort of a curve, that means you have a problem on the ground side, high resistance on the ground side. Because if we're looking at information on a scope, electricity on a scope, what we're looking at is a voltage over a time. All right, so if the voltage comes down very quickly, then we know that there's no problem to ground, because it's getting to ground very quickly. If it's taking its time to get to ground, that means we have a high resistance it needs to overcome. It is trying to get there, but it is taking a long time, because horizontal is our time measurement, right? So it's taking a long time to get to ground. It gets there eventually, sometimes. Over here, it didn't make it. Over here, what are we at? Cursor 2, voltage 0.69. Right, so it's almost 0.7 of a volt above zero. Right, so that is an example of a bad pattern on this single wire network vehicle. Similarly, we always talk about fuel injector patterns too, and we should have a nice square wave. If I saw a fuel injector that looked like that too, bad fuel injector, or high resistance in the circuit, right? So anytime you see that, pulling down to ground like that, high resistance in the circuit. So let's take a look at the wiring diagram on this vehicle. And this is fairly common throughout. You will find this across many manufacturers, many different model years, many different types of network setups, as we have this, what we call a splice pack. So right in here on this vehicle, we have this is on pin 2, so it's J1850. On this is a GM. So pin 2 goes into the splice pack, and then each individual module on that truck, this is a truck, each individual module on that truck has a connection inside the splice pack. There can be up to 12 lines coming off a splice pack. Now, each module has one communication wire that goes to this. So if one module goes down, it could pull down the whole rest of the network, or a portion of the network as well, depending on where it's at. So you need to be able to find where that problem is. Well, the nice thing about this splice pack, wherever it happens to be on the vehicle, is it gives us a test point. All right, so in this case, it's in one of the harnesses, it says. So it looks kind of like this. Now it's gonna either be a straight line, or it'll be side by side, or maybe it's a whole block. Like I know Subaru Forester, it's in a block behind the dash, right above the fuse panel. It kind of looks like it's got fuses in there. Not exactly the best way to go about it, but hey, that's just how it is. So here's a splice pack there, and you can see there's that shorting bar I talked about, right? So if I was going to diagnose this, I'd want to connect in here and jump wires in between the different modules to see if we get communication restored if I had a communication problem. There is an automated tool that does this called the Data Bus Fault Finder. I hear tell they're getting harder to find out there. So if you do have one, it's very useful. If you don't have one, maybe see if you can find one if you do a lot of network problem solving. So what it does is it scans the entire network through this splice pack. It tells you whether or not there's a module connected on that wire, right? So that's these green lights underneath. And then it tells you whether or not it is shorted to power or shorted to ground. So in this case, 1, 2, 3 modules are shorted to ground, and then it considers the bus shorted to ground as well. So it can tell us all this. Now, the nice thing about this, another nice thing about this is these dots next to the letters are switches. I press this switch, takes it out of the circuit, takes it offline, and then we can see if we get communication restored, or we see if the pattern gets better. If the pattern doesn't get better, we click it again, turn it back on, go to the next one. Go down the line until we see if we have our pattern restored. And that's what it's supposed to look like. And then whatever line goes to that's my bad module. Now we could do this if we don't have access to the tool. If we don't have access to the splice pack, we can still go under the dash, find the module, disconnect it, see if communication gets restored. If it doesn't, plug it back in, go on to the next one. All right, so we want to be able to narrow down where the problem is. With that special tool, it takes like 10 seconds after we plug it in. It tells us where the problem is, and then we can just investigate further from there. Otherwise, we can pull body panels apart, and we can do it that way as well. So once the communication is restored, we can see we get a nice square top, nice square bottom, none of that weird curvy stuff going on that we had before. And then that's an example of a good single wire pattern. All right, so that is our background for tonight. Let's go to live on the tool. There we go. Okay, so a couple things I'd like to show you on this tool. So first off, barring this class, where can I find additional information on networks and things of that nature in the vehicle? Well, if you have a snap-on scan tool that has guided component tests in it, so Veris, Zeus, Triton, Modus series, or Vantage as well. If you go in there, there is a training and classes listed in there. So it's usually right at the bottom of the vehicle make page. It says training and classes. And then if we go into, there's a couple functions we'll go through in here, but first one's how to. If I go into how to, there are 65 categories of class built right into the tool. It's going to walk us through. There's hundreds of overall classes in here. So first one I'd like to mention is a 10-minute LIN Bus class. So if you need a refresher on what we just went over with LIN Bus here, and I know admittedly it was kind of fast, but we got to try and fit it all in about half an hour, 40 minutes. So it tells us how LIN Bus works, right? Low-cost alternative to CAN bus. Can still communicate with CAN through master ECM, which would be our gateway module. And let's see. So we want to see 12-volt difference and a 0 volts, 12 volts at the top, 0 volts at the bottom, or a 12-volt overall data field. 20 kilobits per second. And then how we would test it, right? There's a known good pattern right there. There's what it would look like. Test it at the component itself. Yellow to the LIN wire, black to known good ground, because it is color-coded on the top of the tool, right? So we'd be able to go in there. We hit view meter, and it would show the meter for us, automatically sets it up. So that's LIN Bus. We go down a little bit further. I think we get to the 20-minute classes there. Yep, 20-minute CAN bus class. All right, so CAN's a little bit more complicated. Tells you all sorts of different things about it, basics and fundamentals, talk about bus arbitration and different voltages and error handling and signal quality. But how about waveforms? What's good look like? What's bad look like? All right, so here is a typical signal. That's what it should look like. That's known good. Here's an example of CAN low in an open state. Here's an example of CAN high in an open state. Go down a little further. CAN low in a short to positive. So see, it's on the high side of the high line. Both of them could be shorted to positive too, depending on where we are in the circuit. CAN high, shorted high. CAN low, shorted to ground. We could also have this type of look in there. And then CAN high, shorted to ground. Right, depending on where we're at in the signal, it could look different. And then here's a known good. Here's what it should look like. Connect your scope to your pins. And then we would see hit view meter. It'll open up and it'll give us that test as well. Actually, I'm hooked up to a CAN right now, so we can see what that would look like. You know, there's an example of a CAN bus pattern. And we'll talk a little bit more about this big guy at the end in a second. But, you know, so it sets up the voltage for you, sets up the time base for you, puts you right where you need to be. So we can see that on the screen. And that's for anything in the guided component test, right? So this is just more of a generalized test for these things. So that is CAN. Now, if we wanted to do a generalized test on just any general vehicle, we could go in there, right? That's a good place to go. We can also go into power user tests as well. That is a dual channel test. And we have CAN bus right here. So CAN bus, there's a known good pattern. CAN bus speed can vary, so the waveform can also vary. Also gives us our voltages. We can hit view meter. Once again, bing, bing. Sets it up a little bit differently than it did before on the last one. It's a little wider, but that's okay. And then we can see both patterns on the screen right there. Right, so these are all ways that we can go in and test this generally. Now, even more powerful, though, than just generalized tests on a vehicle, how about I ID a vehicle directly? Then it can give me even more information. So in this example, I have a BMW signal generator here. So I'll go to BMW. It's a 2012 328i and 52 kp engine. Let's confirm our vehicle. And it gives us a list of systems that we can test things on. There's over 5 million guided component tests inside the tool. Goes all the way back to 1981, covers 28 different makes. So it goes, tests just about anything on a vehicle. Now, if I wanted to test the CAN bus, we go under engine because that's the main CAN bus there. And we can see I have a CAN bus test. Go into component information. It's going to tell us a lot about how it works. All right, and I'm going to really pretty much describe a lot of this to you here in a second. Also gives us our pinouts, so where we might hook up. In this case, they say we could hook up right at the ECM as well, other than the DLC. And if we go into signature test, it'll set it up, shows us a known good, tells us where to plug in, yellow to high, green to low, and then we should see some results. So let me hit view meter here, get this set. I like to overlap them so they're right on top of each other, but that's just me. All right, so we can see this signal here. Now, in this case, we're looking at 500 microseconds worth of time. So that's 500 millionths of a second. And you can see that's pretty good for seeing the whole packet of data. So this is an entire data packet. Each one of those is one of the little bits and bytes in the data packet. Depending on how long they last, that's how the computer discerns what is what. Also on the end, on some vehicles, not every vehicle with CAN is like this, but on some vehicles, you will see this large bit at the very end. That's what they call an ACK bit or an acknowledgement bit, and that is basically, hey, that's the end of the data. Here's my set of data. That's the end. Whatever comes next, nothing to do with me. All right, so that is your acknowledgement bit. I've acknowledged that this is all the data I have, and here's that packet, and then whoever's next could be the transmission, the engine, whoever. All right, so that's just the end of the set of data is what it basically means. So you may, at the very end, see a very high spike. If you see a bunch of very high spikes in the middle of the pattern, that's bad. That shorts the power. So in this case, we do have just the one at the end. That's okay. Now I want to adjust this a little bit too. I also want to do some measurements. So I'm going to get in a little bit closer. Let's go to like 200 microseconds. It's a little bit better. So you can see a little bit better what's going on. Move it over a bit. Okay. Now I want to also do some measurements, so we'll turn on our cursors here and we'll talk about, oops, mouse didn't click there. There we go. Oh, my mouse is being funky lately. All right, and there's my measurements. Okay, so let's stop this recording, and now we can, oops. We're just having a good one tonight, huh? There we go. There we go, that's better. Okay, so you can see we have two states of this wire here on two wire cam. So what we see is over here, this is our idle state. It's just sitting there, not transmitting data. And then we have our state over here with the data packets. That's where it's transmitting data. When the bus is at rest, if everything is good, we should see about 2.5 volts or so on this flat line right there. I'm seeing 2.38. It's a simulator. It's as close as we get. When it comes over and starts transmitting data, it should go up from that 2.5 volts by about a volt, volt and a quarter, and then it should come down on the low side by about a volt, volt and a quarter, and they should match. Remember how I said before how we're watching a round trip, right? High side's basically a transmit, low side's a receive, and then there's clocks built into all the computers that time everything out, so everything matches up on the screen. High side's going up to about goes on up 0.881, and low side's going 0.988. Once again, pretty close, within a few tenths, maybe even a few hundredths even. So that's pretty darn close to a volt on either side. The range, the normal expected range is either between a volt to a volt and a quarter on either side. So you should have a 2 volt to 2.5 volt range in between here. 0 volts, if it was shorted to ground, that'd be on the bottom. So I could see a glitch to ground. I could see a real quick glitch, or I could just see straight one of the lines stuck at ground. 5 volts would be at the top of the screen because we're watching a 5 volt range. 12 volts would be off the screen. You also want to make sure it's nice and clean, nice and flat like this, and nice flat tops, nice flat bottoms. If I saw a lot of noise, look like static in this pattern, that'd be an example of RF noise, high radio frequency noise in this pattern, and that can cause communication problems. All right, so anything that looks other than this pretty much can cause a communication problem. If I see some of the packets glitch to ground, some of the packets glitch to high side, you just need to know what side it's glitching to, right? So if it's glitching to ground, that's a ground side problem. If it's glitching to power, it's probably short to power somewhere in the system. Could be in the module, could be in the harness itself. So that way you got to dig a little bit deeper and figure out where it is. And to do that, we could also use a wiring diagram. All right. Let's look at a wiring diagram real quick. If you have Schottky or Mitchell and you have a Windows-based scan tool, you can click right in, brings you right in exactly to where you need to go. And might have to put in a few options sometimes, but you can go in and pull the vehicle up. It brings the vehicle through, brings your information through. Then I always like to look at the computer wiring diagrams. So if you go into wiring diagrams, in the system wiring diagrams, we have computer data. Computer data lines gives you the whole overview of this vehicle. So I'll just pull this one. All right, so there's an example of our bus. So over on the, I can zoom in a little bit, I suppose, right? There we go. There's my DLC connector, OBD2 socket. All right, so we can see we got pins 3, 4, 4 and 5 are ground, pins 3 and 11, pins 6 and 14. So we got CAN on there as well. Power is there, 11, 12, and 13, right? So 12, 13, 11, and 3 are all data bus. Right, so car information computer there. Those looks like those wires just go right directly to that. And then my CAN bus goes into my junction box. And then from the junction box, it goes out to other communication modules, right? So HVAC, central information display, steering column switch. So that all goes through a junction box, which would be our gateway module in that case. Right, instrument cluster, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see how they're all kind of networked together. And then we can go across to, if we wish, go into another screen and see how it comes across. And that's just the other half of the car over there. So it's basically split in half that way. So just judging by where it is and where it hooks up to the diagnostic connector, that's really where we want to start, at the diagnostic connector, and work our way from there. All right, so that's interpreting wiring diagrams for that. I know this is kind of a lot of information in a fairly short amount of time, right? But hopefully that gives you at least a good overview of networking and how it works when it's applied to a vehicle, and at least get a start with testing. There's a wealth of information inside the scan tools, a wealth of information and information systems. And we will expand upon this next week, going into the 2-wire data buses.
And with that, that is our time here today. So make sure you tune in for new diagnostic content every week. We will be premiering a new video every Wednesday at 7 p.m. UK time. So make sure you check it out on the YouTube channel. If you're watching, well, of course, you would be watching this on YouTube, but make sure you subscribe, thumbs up, ring the little notification bell so you know anytime we post new content. And it's youtube.com/SnapOnDiagnosticsUK. With that, time for questions. If you have any questions, just feel free. Once again, if you're watching this on a premiere, just leave it in the live chat and we'll answer those. Otherwise, leave a comment under the video and we will get to those as we monitor those comments as well. So I'd like to thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day to learning a little bit more about how you might be able to be more efficient at diagnosing vehicles using some of the information that we've given you today. Hopefully we'll see you next week. Hopefully you can watch and see you on any of our other videos. Have a good week, have a good night, and take care.